Welcome to the fifth session of Sarum Seminar for this year, 2020-2021. Our speaker this evening is Robert Nyden, and his topic is the ships of the Viking Age. For those of you who have been fortunate to hear other talks he's given to this group, you know how much incredible research he puts into his subject and the wonderful, beautiful graphs he creates for us. So I know we're in for a real treat. And along with all of the research work he does for this subject, he brings his own knowledge of construction and fine woodworking. So this is going to be extraordinary. Our next meeting a month from now, March the 15th, is Alan Lansdale. And the title of his talk is In the Wake of the Crusades, the Gothic Abbey of Bellepras, Cyprus. So put that on your calendar, you don't want to miss it. We will have events in April and May. The exact dates are not pinned down. Jackie Young, who some of you may have remembered from way back when, who's now and has long been a professor at Yale, is going courtesy of Zoom to give us a talk. And that's, tremendous offer from her, given the fact that she'll start talking when it's about 11 p.m. her time. And then our other event that'll happen probably in April is a virtual visit to special collections. And now it's all Bob's.
So that's what I call an icon in the middle of that. And the word icon is used a lot these days. And if ever there was an icon for the Vikings, it's the longship raider. Yet most of us have only a vague idea of what those ships were like, how they were made, even where they went and why. So this evening, I would like to address some of those bits of history. First, where and when. This map shows the areas of Scandinavia where Vikings came from: current Denmark, Norway, Sweden, and parts of Finland. The easy access to water routes versus rugged forested interiors made travel by boat the obvious choice, and the relatively short passages made oars the easiest way to power a boat. In the 8th century, several factors conspired to release Vikings from Scandinavia. There was quite a population explosion, and there was a need for more land. There was trading going on. There was greed, and most importantly, the addition of sails to their boats and ships. The earliest known archaeological Viking ship find with a sail dates to about 750, and it was on this island right over here off Estonia, the Salme ship find. 2 ships, there were 40 Vikings buried there with all their tools, and they were only discovered in about 2010. Anyway, moving on, there must have been some action before 750, so I'm calling 700 as the beginning of the Viking Age. Now, before the Vikings had their sails, they had boats something like this, perhaps. This is the Nyden boat, not named after me, the Nyden boat, which dates from about the 4th century. It's from southern Denmark. And it's probably not too dissimilar to the Sutton Hoo ship, which was recently made famous by Netflix. There were no sails. There were oars. You can see these things right here are the oarlocks. The oars would press against them, but otherwise it's very similar to the Viking ships. The Vikings built many different kinds of watercraft, from small fishing boats and ferries to good-sized cargo ships and their famous longships. This slide shows 5 reconstructions of actual Viking ships, Viking age ships built using 1,000-year-old methods by the Viking Ship Museum boatyards in Roskilde, Denmark. And we'll see more about that in a bit. So Viking ships were all made from planks of timber split from logs, usually oak, and overlapped and riveted together with iron nails in a system called clinker built or lapstrake. So that's on the left. This is one of the most important features of Viking ships and one of my main points tonight. If you don't know anything else, please think about clinker built ships. The hull is built up starting at the keel by fastening one board or strake at a time to the one below it with rivets and roves. Roves are the little square plate on the inside. After several strakes are built up, internal braces are added, attached with tree nails. So tree nails are wooden pegs, much like those used in medieval timber framing, but they're carved with a head on one end, driven through bored holes and secured by driving a small wedge into the inner end of the peg so it spreads out and can't pull out again. The ships were made watertight by filling the overlap spaces between the planks with wool strands, moss, or animal hair mixed with tar or tallow. The alternate, a later method of hull construction used elsewhere is called carvel, where a heavy internal frame is first built and sawn planks are fastened to it. The clinker-built ships were all more or less the same long, narrow shape with shallow drafts because they were comparatively light in weight. So they're not so much weight, they didn't sink so far. This meant that they could be used in shallow water, including rivers, and small to medium-sized ships could even be portaged from one river or lake to another. The ships could be powered by oars or by the wind using a single large square sail. As we know, Vikings used longships to make raids and carry their warriors. Often the prow, front of the ship, was decorated with a carving of an animal head, perhaps a dragon or a snake, which could certainly be intimidating. Intimidating, period, excuse me. Ignoring for a moment action to the east in Russia area, this map shows the early Viking attacks on the British Isles. The first wave began in the late 8th century and slacked off by about 807. The 793 raid on Lindisfarne is often cited as raid number 1, although it probably wasn't. But then from the 830s on, not only raids, but settlements were widely established through many parts of Europe. Iceland was settled in the mid-800s, mostly by West Coast Norwegians. Ultimately, Vikings or their direct descendants traveled throughout Europe, from Constantinople to the British Isles, France, Iceland, Greenland, and Newfoundland, not forgetting Russia and the Mediterranean. The so-called Rus were Scandinavians that established Novgorod and other eastern trade towns, and a Viking force scared the emperor in Constantinople enough that he made a pact with them rather than risk another attack. Here's an illustration of the Emperor Theophilus flanked by 2 of his Varangian guards, the 2 tall, bare-headed fellows. Varangian was a Greek adaptation of an Old Norse word meaning sworn companion. So how do we know anything about this? We have 3 things that we can go by: images, writings, and archaeology. People saw these ships and quickly learned what and who they represented. So not surprisingly, pictures of Viking ships soon appeared on coins. This 9th century silver coin from a mint in Hedeby, Denmark, has a remarkably good rendering of a longship, complete with strakes, high bow and stern, shields, and the sail rig. We also have images on stones. The Viking Age Scandinavians didn't leave much in the way of written documents, but they did raise tribute or picture stones to fallen family members and sometimes tied them into mythological stories or gods. This is known as the Smis tribute stone, found in Gotland, which is an island right off the south coast of Sweden these days. So here's another icon-like ship. Here's another picture stone from Gotland with an unpronounceable name. Excuse me, I will not try that one. It shows a mythological battle, including Odin on his eight-legged horse Sleipnir. There we go. So that's a close-up of the ship. Something has happened to my computer, but I think we can manage anyway. Well, it won't do it. I'll have to use the mouse. So this is another rune stone in Spenga, Sweden. Let's see, hang on a second. Let me catch up. My computer is giving me a fit here. So I said the Vikings didn't write histories, but they did have writing, namely runes. So this is a Spenga rune stone, which pictures a fantastical ship encircled by a tribute in runes. So here I've highlighted the ship and its amazing sail, imaginative sail and winds, and shown the translated runes. So Guthborn and Odi, they raised this stone in memory of Guthmar, their father. He who died stood valiantly in the staff of the ship, now lies inhumed in the west. So here we have a lot of ships on the Bayeux tapestry, which actually is an embroidery, but we call it the tapestry. So we call William the Conqueror and his invaders of Saxon England Normans, but that's just a variant of Northmen. William was a 6th generation descendant of 10th century Danish Viking invader Rolf. That's Rolf with an H, who became Rollo because French people couldn't pronounce Rolf. Anyway, the Bayeux needlework shows Viking-style ships complete with oar ports and strakes, and another prominent feature, the steering oar, or steerboard. Acting as a rudder, it fastened to the right-hand side of the ship at the stern. The term steerboard has come into English as starboard in our times, denoting the right-hand side of a boat or ship. For truly literary history of Viking Age, we must turn to the sagas and eddas, which mostly came from Iceland, as well as the Anglo-Saxon Chronicle and some religious institutional documents. Though written sometimes hundreds of years after the events and sometimes mixing in mythology and iffy data, these do contain seemingly accurate descriptions of some ships, fleets, battles, and daily life. Ships may be described poetically, rendered as the oar steed or the surf dragon, the fjord elk, the ocean striding bison, or the fleet of otters world. For the Eddas, Snorri Sturluson wrote a manual to help understand poetic allusions and metaphors. This is a 17th century version of his 13th century efforts. So one-eyed Odin is at the top center, and our friend the eight-legged horse Sleipnir is at lower left. So let's look at some archaeology. I want to look at 3 different archaeological ship finds, 2 possibly familiar, the other maybe not. By carefully studying these remnants, it's been possible to figure out surprisingly subtle details about the materials and the methods used in their construction. So first we'll look at Oseberg, which is a royal ship used as a tomb for 2 women, one younger, one older, buried with a vast amount of grave goods. The ship was preserved for over 1,000 years by a heavy clay soil by which it was covered. Then there's the Gokstad ship, another probably royal tomb ship, bigger, this time for a middle-aged man, also with a big load of goods aboard, including 2 smaller boats. And then the Skaldelv ships, which are a group of 5 ships purposely sunk to block the entrance to the Roskilde Fjord in Denmark. So here's where these ships are from. And there are a lot of other ship finds. You can see these little symbols here and there around, but Oseberg and Gokstad are very close to Oslo, and they're both in the Oslo Museum. Skulldelev is down about a half-hour train ride from Copenhagen. So here's the Oseberg ship, excavated in 1904. You can see from the photo that much of the fine detail was preserved. I mean, if you look at this prow here, it looks rather a mess. But if you visit it in the Viking Museum in Oslo, you'll see that most of it was saved, put back together. Some missing bits were replaced with new wood, but it looks pretty good. In the museum photos, you can see some of the typical Viking Age features that I've mentioned, including the riveted lap strakes. You can see the rivets here. They're about 7 or 8 inches apart, all the way down on every single strake. You can see the oar ports and the steering oar right there in the foreground. This ship has been dated to about the year 810 by dendrochronology, and the design was not yet perfected at this time. The ship would not have done well in the North Sea because its sides don't come up very high. Note that the oars mount through the top strake, and in this photo from the prow, you can see there's a distinct break in the curve of the hull where the 2 top strakes join. Moving on to the Gokstad ship, which was discovered in a burial mound and excavated in 1880. This photo shows the hull after the overburden of earth and most of the goods included in the burial had been removed. The Gokstad ship was built about 80 years after the Oseberg, and the design has been refined. This is also a larger ship, built to carry warriors over the open sea. The bow photo shows why some have called this the loveliest ship ever built. Here the hull curves smoothly all the way up. The sides rise higher to combat ocean waves, and the oar ports are in the 3rd strake down. The tops of the prow and stern were not found in the excavation, so they've been left plain in the museum restoration. And here you can also see the drawing that was made at the time of the excavation that shows what they found and where, and you can see a lot of it was still there. Several copies of the Gokstad ship have been made starting soon after it was discovered. A close replica was built and sailed from Norway to Chicago and exhibited in the 1893 World's Fair. It's still in Illinois. It's in a barn stored until the saviors of it can come up with the money and a place to put it. In 1962, the remains of 5 Viking Age ships were discovered and excavation begun near Skulldelev on the Roskilde Fjord, which is enlarged in the upper inset. Roskilde was for centuries the largest city in Denmark and its capital. The name means Rose Spring, Ro being the semi-legendary 6th century King Hrothgar, or Roar, and Kilde meaning spring. The medieval cathedral there has been the royal burial site for centuries, at any rate an important place in the Viking Age. In the 11th century, 5 ships were filled with rocks and purposely sunk across the shallow, narrow neck in the fjord leading to Roskilde to prevent attacks by warships. This drawing maps their placement, spanning 3 possible entry channels, which are the dashed lines with arrows. You can see they sunk them right across the shallowest or the deepest spots to keep other ships out. A cofferdam was installed around the scuttled ships, and the remains were carefully recovered after the water was pumped out. You can see from this photo what the recovery site was like. The ships were flat as pancakes. The 5 Skulldelev ships were a unique and invaluable architectural I'm having a hard time, archaeological find as they represented each of the main vessel types that typified Viking Age seafaring. There was a large ocean-going trading vessel, 2 warships, and 2 smaller coastal transport or fishing vessels. Over the next years, the 5 ships were documented, conserved, and reassembled for exhibition in the newly built Viking Ship Hall of the Viking Ship Museum in Roskilde, opened in 1969. You can see the medieval cathedral on the hill up behind. I was lucky enough to visit the museum and the cathedral in 1972. The ships were well preserved in their watery grave, though you may not think so when you look at this photo of the interior of the museum. But soon after the recovery and stabilization was complete, a plan was made to build one-to-one sailing reconstructions of all 5 of these ships. And we'll look briefly at 4 of them. So the one known as Skulldelev 1 was built in western coastal Norway about 1030. Dating is almost always by dendrochronology, sometimes by things found in it, but also with all this wood, they were able to do dendro dating. Although there were larger cargo ships, this was likely big enough for travel to Iceland and Greenland. Cargo vessels were used to carry trade goods and possessions for immigrants. They're wider than the longships and traveled more slowly. Planked decks were only laid at the ends of the ship, so the space in the middle was left for cargo, including livestock. And you can see the reproduction in the lower part. Notice the hull is dark brown. That's because it's been covered with tar. We'll talk about the tar a bit later. So Skulldelev 2 is a different beast. First off, note that it was built in Dublin, a city founded by Vikings. If any of you are sailors, you will know that a sailing speed of 15 knots, which is a little over 17 miles an hour or 28 kilometers per hour, is moving right along, even for a modern boat. This is a benefit of its lightweight and resultant shallow draft. The clinker construction created a somewhat flexible unibody hull, if you will, that made it easier for movement through the swells. A beautiful reproduction called Sea Stallion was built by the Viking ship boatyard. Here it is under sail. And here's 2 other views of it. Notice the gold wind vane up at the prow. It's a reproduction of this elaborately decorated 11th century ship vane known as the Hagen vane, now also in the Oslo Viking Museum. It was recovered and used as a weather vane on a church for 4 centuries, starting in the 13th century. But such gold-plated vanes were high status items and used on the ships of powerful chieftains. And you can see the incredible decoration, the beasts here and the foliage and all this, these little guys. I love it. These 2 drawings demonstrate the difference in size and shape of these 2 ships we've just looked at, the so-called Gnar cargo ship and the long raider. So Skulldelev 3 was built of oak in Denmark, a small coastal trading ship, a draft of about 3 feet. Smaller, the best preserved, actually, of all of them. They found about 75% of the original parts remaining. Again, the light structure would have allowed passage up shallow rivers and inlets and simple beaching rather than requiring a pier or a quay. Skulldelev 5 is the last archaeologically recovered ship that we'll look at. It was a small warship with 13 pairs of oars compared with the big longship we saw a few moments ago that had 30 pairs of oars. But at a bit over half the length, it would also have been more maneuverable in narrow inlets or rivers. The reproduction includes the round shields typical of early Viking period. Okay, so we've looked at the ships. We know what they look like, a bit about how they were built and designed. So now let's see what was needed to actually build one. This page shows a sampling of iron tools used in the Viking Age to build ships. At upper left are an adze and an axe, really the same tool with the blade rotated 90 degrees. Also a hand knife used to shape tree nails and carve many of the details. As I said before, I think saws are generally unknown or very rare in Viking Age Scandinavia. So axes did most of the shaping of a ship's wood. A very useful one was called a single bevel hewing axe, which is shown here below. With it, one can slice across the grain to flatten the plank or to put an angle or a bevel on the strake or overlap. And you can see a fellow at the Viking Museum doing just that. It's completely flat on one side, so you can eventually make a very smooth board. Going back to the tool collection, there's a selection of hammers, a pair of pliers, continuing clockwise, some shaping planes, a chisel, and finally a breast auger. The breast drill or auger uses what are called spoon bits for boring medium or large diameter holes. The top of the vertical tool body pivots freely in a hole in the horizontal top piece, which rests against and is pressed against by the carpenter's chest, as demonstrated by Noah in this 13th century illumination where he is creating a lovely clinker-built Viking-style ark. I love that picture of Noah, and you can see he just turns the handles and slowly bores his way through the wood. For smaller holes, you could use one of these, a bow drill. You can see the fellow at the right. The string of the bow wraps around this sort of spool-like feature, and then there's a tiny drill bit at the front that will bore, say, a 1/4 inch hole. And speaking of rivets, peening the shaft of the rivet to lock the rove plate inside the boat was a 2-person job. One hefty fellow would hold a weighty backing hammer against the head of the rivet on the outside to keep it from being knocked out, while the inner worker used a small clinking hammer to tap, 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 and mushroom and flatten the protruding shaft. According to one video on the Viking Ship Museum site, the term clinker built derives from the sound of the hammers beating those rivets. Other more stodgy sources say clinker comes as a variant of clench or clinch, terms used to describe bending over nails. Not all of the tools were iron. Clamps were necessary to hold the strakes in place for fitting and trimming, and ultimately while rivets were installed. All these wood clamps use wedges and leverage to do their job. Okay, we have the tools. What about the wood? Oak was the preferred material, though in some regions, especially Western Norway, pine and fir were much more abundant. Ash and other hardwoods were good for oars. Here we have energetic men cutting timber for an invasion fleet on the Bayeux Tapestry. The fellow at the right is using one of those hewing axes to shape strakes. Much of Scandinavia was heavily forested, and to start with, there must have been an abundance of large trees to choose from fairly close to the sea. This drawing shows ideal uses for various growth formations. In a dense forest, trees might grow very straight and tall, ideal for splitting into long keels and planks, though naturally curved trunks could be more easily bent into a hull shape, and even branch junctions could be useful. And there you see one of those sort of hooked oar holders that we saw on that ancient ship. And you can see how the oak logs were cleaved. They were typically split into 16 wedges. It's hard now to envision just how many Viking Age ships there were. Sagas and various chronicles report a fleet of 67 ships at Nantes in 843, 120 ships attacking Paris in 845, a 252 ship raid in Frisia in the 850s, and so on for many decades. My point is that it would have taken a lot of large trees to build all those longships, and I'm certainly not the first to realize that. There is evidence that forest husbandry was practiced 1100 years ago or more to try to meet the need. This meant directed trimming, pruning, and planting for the future, just as in late medieval England, some forward-thinking cathedral clerks of the works cultivated oaks they knew would be needed for repairs hundreds of years in the future. Interestingly, in Denmark, the battles of Copenhagen of 1801 and 1807 and a fire in 1804 nearly destroyed the Danish naval fleet. To safeguard the ability to rebuild after another such event, the government planted oaks for the future, just in about 1810. 200 years later, the Viking Ship Museum in Roskilde was allowed to harvest a few of these now mature 3-foot diameter oaks to use in reproductions of Viking age ships. Here are some photos of cleaving one of these giants using traditional means. Giant mauls, wedges, and muscle. The clothing is different, but the methods are the same. Start at one end, slowly work their way down, driving in wedges. Boom. In the background, you can see a ship under construction. You can see they've built the strakes part way up and they've got some of the braces on the inside. Eventually they split it all the way down. And then once they do that, they have to split it again and again and again. This drawing lets us review and summarize how the Viking ships were built. The log was cleaved, the wedge-shaped planks were smoothed, trimmed, beveled at the joints. The resulting strakes were fitted with edges overlapping, starting at the keel and working up evenly on both sides, joined with iron rivets. Interior braces were added at intervals to maintain the hull shape, attached with wooden treenails. And here, you've seen this picture before. Here's a treenail going in, and you can see over on this other side where one is installed, you can see the heads of the treenails where they've come through on the other side. Here are two photos from the Roskilde Museum showing work in progress. The lower photo, the strakes are smooth. That is, the side pieces are smooth, and the braces have been notched, stepped to fit the overlapping joints. In the upper example, the braces are not notched, and they're attached instead by treenails to the strakes at carefully placed shaped humps that were left on the inside of the strakes when they were hewn. And then you can also notice that they've used a rivet up at the very end of the brace instead of treenails. This latter method keeps the braces away from the wood, which is better for drainage and keeps things drier on the inside. And it's easier to shape those braces without having to notch them. And the braces are actually stronger without the notches. This drawing tries to show the building process, and we can see a number of the steps starting at lower left. Splitting the logs, setting the keel and fitting the prow and stern, smoothing the strakes with a broad axe, beveling and shaping the strakes, boring holes for rivets down there in the very bottom and the front, clamping the strakes in place and riveting, and at the upper right, curved braces and knees are carved from bent tree parts. In a wider view, we see the mast support timber and more bracing installed, the mast raised, ballast stones placed, some decking adding, and the sail and spar finally in place. Of course, that's how the professionals did it. There's also the do-it-yourself longship with a selection of axes, 100 oak trees, and 2,500 tree nails included, some assembly required. Go to your local Vikia. Well, what about materials if you really wanted to build your own? In Viking Age Scandinavia, you couldn't just go out and get a keg of nails at your local Home Depot. No. So let's look at the components and where they came from. First, what about those rivets and roves? They needed iron and lots of it. Where did it come from? The answer is bog iron, which is a naturally occurring ferrous mineral deposit that precipitates from iron-rich spring water due to the action of some microorganisms and dissolved gases. The orange water in this photo is a tip-off. The harvested ore looks something like this. It has a lot of other stuff in there besides iron, including silica, manganese, and various salts. So it is roasted at as high a temperature as was possible in a bloomery. The ore was layered with charcoal in something that might have looked a bit like this. And when it was done, the so-called bloom, the heated iron and other stuff was pulled out, and the waste slag, which sort of rose to the outside edges, was knocked away from it. Then the smiths took over and beat the raw iron, which caused many of the remaining impurities to be slowly expelled. Only then could he form quarter-inch square rod and form the nail-shaped rivets with a head about 2 1/4 inches long, and the rove plates, which are about a 1/2 inch square. For a large ship, it would have taken about 7,000 rivet sets. Interestingly, the reproduction ships built at the Roskilde Museum had used high-quality modern commercial iron for their rivets, but they've had a lot of problems with rust despite tar and oil coating. It seems that the impurities left in Viking Age iron, including silica, protected their rivets from rusting so fast. So one of the modern boats that's now 20 years old has suffered split wood from the expansion of rusting rivets. So in the major refit that's now underway, they're using non-historic copper rivets instead. Next on our shopping list is tar. From the time I started reading about building Viking Age ships, I wondered what kind of tar they used. They talked about it in the descriptions, but they didn't say much. Surely not the dregs of petroleum refining like we see used on roofs and roadways in our time. It was, in fact, derived from resinous trees like pine and fir, and was a large enough industry that pine tar from Scandinavia was an export product. Marine archaeologists have found lots of discarded tar brushes and buckets in the silt of harbors where ships were fitted and repaired 1,000 years ago. And a recent article reports on how the tar was made. This diagram shows a tar kiln. The system was to create a conical hole in the ground. You line it and then fill it with resinous wood packed tightly, cover the top with kindling, chips, and seal the whole thing with turf and soil, and then you set it alight from the top. Without enough oxygen to really burn, the heat would liquefy the wood resin, which would drain out the bottom of the cone-shaped pile. The wood then became charcoal, which was used in processing the iron ore. The volume of tar made in one burn could be fairly small, maybe 15 liters or 4 gallons, say if a single farm used one tree in a pit about 1 meter across. But many large pits have been found in Sweden, like this one, that's about 5 meters across and could produce 10 times as much, 200 liters or 50 gallons at a time. Trees that were marked for the tar kiln would probably have had lower limbs lopped off and big slashes made in the trunk a year or 2 before felling to goad the tree into making extra sap to seal the injuries, resulting in extra volumes of tar in the end. Tar was painted into the joint between the strakes and augmented with horsehair, wool strands, or even moss to add body and make for watertight caulking. It was also painted inside and out on the hull to protect against water infiltration, shipworms, and rust. So tar could be painted on. Pitch was more solid. It was tar that had been heated longer and was smeared on with a trowel or knife edge. Both would eventually evaporate volatile material and skin over and become rigid. Okay, we got iron, we got tar. Cordage. A glance at these ship drawings shows lots of ropes and rigging. Various materials were used by the Vikings. Walrus hide and other animal skin was braided into rope for standing rigging, like the stays that hold the mast fore and aft and side to side. The Roskilde Museum uses twisted and braided hemp on some of its reproductions, although hemp has never been found in archaeological finds, although hemp does grow in Scandinavia. They also use horsehair lines for some of the running rigging, that is, the ones that move, that have to move when you move the sails. And they have also reproduced archaeologic rope made of bast. Bast is fiber that's extracted from under the bark, or the underbark of linden trees, which are also known as lime trees, or in the US as basswood, therefore bast. There's a video made by the Viking Ship Museum that shows this process, but it's way too long to include here. So here are a few stills to give you an idea of the process. First, you fell 4-inch diameter linden trees and cut them into meter lengths. Then you score the bark lengthwise and peel it away. Then you bundle the bark pieces you've got and soak them for 3 months. Then you peel away the soft bast from the outer bark. There's more peeling. And then you wash it in running water. You hang it up to dry. You split it into narrow strips. You split it some more. You split it even more. Then you take the strips and you start twisting it into cords. Piece at a time, adding as you go, twisting, twisting, until finally you get a cord. Then you twist the cords into ropes, and you can add splices and loops if desired. Well, that's not a trivial process. To give you an idea of how much work one ship requires, the Viking Ship Museum says that in its present form, the rigging of the Skalldalev II reproduction sea stallion requires 1,400 meters of hand-woven linden bast rope for the standing and some running rigging, some 600 meters of hand-woven horsehair rope for the sheets and the bolt rope, which is the rope that binds the edge of the sail. In addition, spare rope is required. The rope is made by, guess what, a rope maker who will spend more than 5,400 hours on the task, using almost 400 kilograms of prepared linden bast and about the equivalent of 600 horsetails, 174 kilograms of horsetail to make those things. So we've come now to the most important feature of Viking ships beyond the hull itself, namely the sails. The Viking knew the value of a good sail. The legendary longship Skithblethnir was built by dwarves for the god Freyr. It was large enough to carry the entire Norse pantheon and all their weapons, but when not in use, Freyr could fold it up like a piece of fine cloth and carry it in his pocket. But the greatest attribute was her sail, which when hoisted were always filled with a strong, powerful wind that would take her wherever she needed to go. Real Viking sails were made of wool, which is surprising at first blush, but the Scandinavians couldn't grow cotton in their climate, and though they did make linen from flax, linen is tough to weave and handle and doesn't hold up well. The Old Norse sheep were about half the size of the modern breed and lived semi-wild, grazing on rough heather moorland, coming into contact with their owners only once or twice a year. The fleece came in black, brown, and white, but unlike modern breeds, the fleece was made up of 2 layers, a wiry outer one covering a soft, highly insulated underwool. It was also high in water-repelling lanolin. Well, double-coated sheep shed their wool naturally when the weather warms up, so they were not shorn, but rude. That is, the wool was pulled off in tufts by hand. 4 or 5 people can rue a sheep in about 10 minutes. The sheep in these photos show a heritage herd that lives on an island in a fjord and belongs to a folk high school in Norway. The sheep are left on their own most of the year, but in May, the whole school sails out to the island in Viking-style ships to rue the sheep. The wool is cleaned, carded, and the wiry outer wool is separated from the softer, plush inner wool, much as it would have been done 1,000 years ago. These pictures appeared in an article called "No Sheep, No Vikings" in Hakai magazine, which I strongly recommend. You should look into it, hakai.com. You can subscribe to their online version. It's free. Here we see a Viking woman with a hank of wool on a distaff in the crook of her arm, spinning a thread with a weighted spindle whorl. I'm not going to go into how to do that. If you're interested, there's lots of videos that show exactly how, but it was slow. The spinning wheel was not known in Europe at that time. Modern aficionados of the art have said that a proficient worker could spin 100 to 160 feet of wool thread per hour. About 100 miles of thread were needed to weave a sail. The wiry outer wool was used for the stronger warp threads, which ran from top to bottom of the sail and bore its weight. The softer, bulkier inner wool was made into the weft threads, filling the matrix of the woven cloth. Interestingly, one was spun clockwise, the other counterclockwise. And I haven't consulted Evelyn about this, but my feeling is that it causes the woven cloth to lie flatter if they're twisted in opposite directions. I could be completely wrong. Once the thread was made, it was woven into strips 3 or 4 feet wide on a vertical weft-weighted loom, like the one in this Danish Folk Museum's simulation of a Viking house. The warp threads were bunched and tied at the bottom to stones to keep them taut. A bar could be manipulated to allow the weft threads to cross alternately in front or behind the selected set of warp threads. Typically, the sailcloth was woven in a twill pattern, working down from the top of the loom. So you can see in this picture, the completed cloth is at the top, and you'll run something through and then use that sort of boomerang shaped thing to push it in tight. So working down from the top, which seems unusual to us. The scale of the workforce and the time needed to manufacture all the woolen products in Viking Age Scandinavia was immense. Consider that most of their clothes were also wool, and that the warriors and sailors going out probably needed more than one set of clothing. So let's look at what a single sail entailed, say the 90 square meter sail for this cargo ship. So first of all, we need sheep, as we've seen. They were these small, hardy ones, but we need more, many more. The annual wool production of 200 sheep to make this one sail. Each sheep would produce about 500 grams. It's a little more than a pound. Then to process and weave it would take the equivalent of 4 people working 10-hour days for a year to yield this one sail. The strips or webs were fulled, stretched, dried, and sewn together along their long edges to make the nearly square sail. The seams were formed so that the front of the sail was as smooth as possible to make uninterrupted airflow across the face when the sail was at any angle other than having wind directly from the stern. The Vikings didn't know the theories of aerodynamics that explain why airplane wings provide lift, but the same physics applies to boat sails. And the smoother the airflow over the front of the sail curve, the better it works pulling the boat through the water. To improve the effect even more, the sails were smeared with a mixture of horse mane fat, water and mineral ochre to fill the voids in the weave. And the face was then smoothed even more with tar or with hot liquid beef tallow. That's one sail. Now, it might last for decades if cared for, but in the 11th century, there was an estimated 1 million square meters of sail on Viking ships. And some sources estimate there might also have been 1 million sheep and ships. Certainly, making wool for sails and most of the clothing would have required a huge workforce, mostly women and children, and many of those were either slaves or heavily indentured. So an industry, and not just a cottage industry. Indeed, no sheep, no Vikings. Okay, we've got the ships. We need to go somewhere. Vikings did not use maps. They had other ways of working out where they were, however. They didn't have maps, but we do. Looking at where they sailed, one thing to note is that much of the time they would have been within sight of land, or nearly so, and they would have memorized landmarks. A sailor on a ship could catch sight of a 300-foot high hill from over 20 miles offshore, and 30 miles if he climbed the mast. They also looked at things around them. They looked at the color of the sea. Was there dirt that's being carried out from a river? Are they close to land and glaciers are melting and turning the water turquoise? They could look at the way the waves were moving and the drift that the current was providing. They looked out for birds that they knew lived close to land, and mammals like this coastal seal that didn't get very far away from shore. They might even smell the pungent aroma of cliffside rookeries that were out of sight over the horizon. Or they might see ice blink, which is the reflection of bright snow and ice off the underside of clouds that you could see from many miles away. It might show an ice field or maybe Greenland over the horizon. They learned that if they sailed due west from a certain part of the Norwegian coast, that they would run into Greenland. Due west you might think of as a straight line, but if you look at the top of a globe, all of the lines of latitude are running in circles, and so is this one. So 61 degrees is what we would think of as the correct latitude. But how to make sure that they were not drifting north or south of their intended course once they got past the Shetland Islands, which you see are just about on their line of course. So there's the Shetland Islands there. So they could actually go from here to here to here, but if you wanted to go to Greenland, it might be faster to go right across the line. The Vikings are not thought to have any kind of magnetic compass, but it was possible for them to use some celestial navigation. In the Northern Hemisphere, one easy way to find latitude is to observe the North Star Polaris. Its height above the horizon in degrees equals your latitude. If you go outside tonight, you can look up and it'll be 38 degrees above the horizon if you live in the San Francisco area. The Vikings didn't know about degrees or latitude, but they could observe the height of Polaris by calibrating a stick at Bergen, Norway before they set out, holding it up at arm's length, say, with the bottom in line with the horizon and the top touching Polaris. Then while they're sailing, they could do the same exercise at night and maintain the same relationship and know that they were heading on the right line. The angle of the Milky Way across the summer sky would also be a reference for their heading. Well, there are two problems with this. Number one, the skies of the North Atlantic are often overcast, hiding the stars completely. And worse, in summer, when most of these voyages would have been made, the sun would barely set at all, so it would often have been too bright to even see the stars. But the sun could also help. Since the sun would be in the south at high noon, they could at least know which way they were heading relative to it. At noon, an oar held vertical would throw a shadow pointing north, or even the mast might point north. It's also possible that some Vikings may have used an instrument called the sun shadow board to help them stay at 61 degrees north latitude. An artifact found in 1948 at the site of a Viking Age settlement in Greenland has intrigued scientists ever since. It's only half of whatever it started out as, but careful analysis shows that by adding a carefully sized wedge-shaped gnomon, at high noon, the shadow of the gnomon would fall on one of 17 carefully and accurately incised lines near what's marked north on this diagram. So there's the lines up at the top, and at the bottom you can see the gnomon at the bottom there, the blue shadow, which falls on one of those lines. Nobody knows for sure if that's actually what happened, but if you did have the right size gnomon and you did line it up with one of those lines while holding it at high noon on your ship, you could sail straight across on a desired line of latitude, and depending on which of those little lines you lined up with, it might take you to Greenland or it might take you to the southern tip of Iceland. So there are a lot of other lines on there, and there is an incredibly erudite article done by the Royal Society, which explains or tries to explain all of the lines on there and coordinate them to known celestial observations. But basically, we don't know. But that's about all we do know about how the Vikings navigated. And having built the ships and sent them on their way, my work here is done. So thank you for your attention, and I'll email a copy of my bibliography to the Sarum seminar list, which will look something like this. But I would like to point out one particular book, which is this one, which I must thank Evelyn Macmillan for lending to me. Most of the other books on my bibliography are from the 60s, 70s, 80s, out of our libraries. But this one is brand new, just came out last year. And it's a hefty tome, but it's very readable, and it has everything that you might want to know about Vikings, including some amazingly salacious details that you might not have ever thought of. So ash and elm are the equivalent of Adam and Eve in Viking mythology. And you'll find that on the very first pages of this. But at this point, I'm done, so I'm going to stop sharing my screen.
You're ready for Q&A?
Yeah, there's quite a few things in the chat I noticed. Plus, of course, there are a few hands up, although some of William has both his hand up and notes in the chat. So, but I can answer a few of the ones in the chat pretty quickly if you'd like me to do that.
All right, why don't you start with that? Okay,
so the first question is, how long are these ships? The lengths were actually, the ones that were excavated, I actually put those lengths on there, but the longships, that beautiful reproduction longship, is just shy of 100 feet long. There were some that are longer. They didn't used to think there were, but as my brother pointed out, there's a saga that implies there's one longer, and they have in fact found a ship that they think was about 120 feet long. Yeah. And there's also a saga that says that in 998, the Long Serpent was built for King Olaf that could carry 200 armed men and had 34 pairs of oars. Wow. 34 pairs of oars. That's a lot of oars. So if that, I mean, that could be one of those little exaggerations that sagas are good for. But at any rate, you can think of them as being about 100 feet long for one of these invading ships. But also, as I said, one of those, the Skuldelef ship, was a small one. It was about 57 feet long, much more maneuverable. Let's see, what else? David Macmillan points out that a stick can find noon within about 15 minutes, but at that high latitude, the sun is very low, even in summertime, and so it's hard to find exact noon. But what I didn't go into, that little device that I showed you at the end for the sun shadow, it actually was much more clever than just that gnomon. It actually had two gnomons. It had a little thin one that was long, it was wide, but only maybe a 1/4 inch high. And they used that to tell when high noon was. It could tell you within about, well, 10 to 15 minutes, and it could tell you which side of high noon you were on. Because if you're looking south at the sun and it's low on the horizon, it's very hard to tell exactly when it is. I mean, nowadays, people have to use watches that are calibrated to the closest second to take a sunshot. So if anybody still takes sunshots. So at any rate, they were quite clever with all that. And William asked what the draft was of the warrior ship. They were all about 1 meter, about 3 feet. And absolutely right, the biotapestry shows them pulling these ships right up onto shore, shows the people jumping out with their kirtles pulled up to their waist and they're dragging the ships ashore. You should look at, I never looked at that part of the tapestry before. It's quite fascinating. Somebody also asked, maybe William again, if they used steam to bend the wood. No, they did not. However, you know, there's sort of differences of opinion. At the Viking Ship Museum, they used something like that. They had an open flame and they would soak the strakes in the water for a while, and they would heat part of it until it got really hot. And then they would take it over and clamp it into place and drill the holes, and then they'd take it out and bend some more. So another place said that they didn't need to do that. It depends, I suspect, on how small the ship was, how big it was, what kind of wood they had. So, okay, so let's do some other raised hands.
Okay. Virginia, what have you got? Unmute yourself.
Unmute, Virginia.
No, she's
There.
there.
Okay, sorry. So you mentioned 5 ships were sunk and there were 5 types, you know, big cargo, little cargo, warrior, and so on. Was that accidental, or was that planned that they would do a certain number of types, or maybe it was the length that they needed to do the proper blocking? Was there any thinking on that?
Well, there are theories, and there's 2 things going on. First of all, some of the ships were just about ready to be sunk anyway. So, you know, you think about all the ships that they must have had around, some of them are not in good shape, and so they used those, they were the right length and so on. Some of them had indicated that there were very recent repairs to them, however. So I think personally that they looked at the distance that they had to cover and the ships they had available, and they said, okay, we're using this ship, and they loaded rocks in it. So there's no documentation, let's put it that way.
Yeah.
But they came from all over the place, you know, these ships. So, okay.
Kathleen, you have a question? Unmute yourself.
Who are we talking to?
Kathleen.
I can't see Kathleen.
No, almost. Not quite.
Should I ask my second question?
Oh, sure. Sorry.
No, it's okay. Oh, no, she's waving.
It's punching her.
Well, okay, the length you mentioned perhaps was 100 warriors, so 100 feet. And I'd assume 50 warriors on either side, so it'd be 2 feet per man. That doesn't seem like a lot of space to me.
Well, what's interesting is they did not have seats for the rowers either. They had sea chests that they sat on, and there were only, so in that one there were 60 rowers. That one that was from Skuldelev. There were 60 rowers, but there were more people than that. Yes, you're right. It was very crowded. It was not a luxury yacht.
But if
But
they
they-
were going far distances,
They were, you're right. And except when they went overnight, if they were going down the coast to raid Paris or something, they wouldn't sail at night. They would go ashore and set up camp or lower the sail and put it over the boat as a tent. So yeah, it was not comfortable. In fact, someplace I have a, let's see, a description of what it was like. So there was no shelter on the vessels. At night, the Vikings might pull them up on land. They'd take the sail down, lay it across the ship, and make a tent to sleep under, or they'd pitch woolen tents on shore. If the crew was far out to sea, they'd sleep on deck, if there was one, under blankets made from animal skin. Food would have been dried or salted meat or fish. It could only be cooked if the crew were able to land. They'd drink water, beer, and sour milk. There you go.
But I mean, I just don't understand how there could be 100 people in 100 feet. It just seems much too little.
I
No matter
can't
what-
help it.
Okay.
I didn't make it up. I'm
Oh,
just,
okay. I thought that
yeah,
was your estimate. Okay.
it's
Sorry.
not my estimate, and it's not one source either. All of these things talk about a vast number of people in these raiding ships, and that was what's interesting is then they would not only raid, but they would take people. They took slaves, so there would be even more people on the way back.
Mm.
I don't believe this measurement. That's all I can say. I'm done.
Well, the measurements they're documented. I mean, there's no doubt about how big the ships were.
No, but I mean for the number of people. Anyway, that's enough.
Okay. All right.
Andrew Corcoran, question?
What about you?
Yeah, I really enjoyed the section on the rope and the sails because it showed how complex the technology was. And can you hear me? Yeah.
I can hear you fine.
And I think both technologies are Egyptian, at least sails and ropes. And given it would take so long to develop that technology, do you know anything about the transmission? Like why did it suddenly appear in the Nordic area in the 700? And why had it been so long getting there?
Well, that's a good question. And it's interesting that they did not have sails before that. In Roman times, Tacitus actually specifically says that oddly, the ships in the north do not have sails. So the answer, I think, and you have to read the big 600-page book to really know, but they embarked on trading. So they had these ships that rode all over the Baltic, and they could row pretty fast. They could row 8-9 knots, which is pretty fast. So they were trading way into what is now Russia, using these rowed boats, but they ran into other cultures that had sails, and they realized that if they wanted to go, say, to England, rowing was not going to do it. I mean, Sutton Hoo, yeah, that boat rowed over. The Anglo-Saxons did in the 7th century, but it wasn't a good way to get across. So I think they saw other things going on, and one of the things they did is they built a boat with a keel on it. So with a sailboat, you need a keel, otherwise you just get blown sideways. And I think they saw boats with keels, and they saw images of other boats. You know, they saw drawings perhaps, but they were down in Constantinople long before the 800s that they show there. So I don't know, people came to visit also. I mean, there's some famous stories that were written by Arab writers who came up into the Rusland, up to Novgorod, I can't say it anyway, up to Russia, and wrote detailed things. And they, I'm sure, shared the technology that they knew about. So how exactly, who did the first one? I have no idea. I don't know. It's beyond my ken.
Next question, Kathleen. Are you back online here?
I think I am. Can you hear me?
Yes.
All right. Bob, I wanted to know if you had kept up with the Roskilde operations. We were there 3 or 4 years ago, and they were fitting out the replica boats and were planning to make several voyages. One was going to Ireland, and I think another was going to Iceland or Greenland. And there was even talk of one coming to America. So did you know anything about what they are planning to do with those replica boats?
Well, I read the planning, just as you did. The museum is closed at the moment, and I sort of have a feeling that they're not keeping the website up very well. Although there's still a lot of stuff on there, but I did read about the planned, they were going to take that that big replica boat across to Ireland, and I think they did, but I don't know any more about it. And I haven't personally been there since 1972. So
We were there a little more recently than that.
Drew, you had a question earlier. Do you still?
It was about how do you know it's noon? And he answered it already. So I brought my hand down.
Very good.
Thanks, Jim. Thank you.
I have a comment too, if you don't mind.
depends.
Bob, yeah, a comment about the how they protected themselves on board, and the answer is they did seem to take little awnings with them, which they used especially when they were in port. So I don't know if I don't think they used them much when they were out in the ocean, and certainly not when they were sailing, because they would have just flapped and blown off.
Yes, I think you're right. They did have awnings. Some of the books are, you have to be really careful. The books, I think, are pretty reliable. The internet is not always. And some of the internet sources said, oh, they took down the sail and hung it over the top to use as an awning. Well, taking that sail off is a jump and a half. So just raising and lowering it is a huge job. So I don't think they really took it down, but they had little sticks that poked up that had a sort of fork, and they could hang an awning over a stick like that, just right down the middle of the boat when they pulled in ashore. So yes, they did.
Scott?
Bob, that was a terrific talk. Thank you very much. I have one comment and then a question. My comment is further to Virginia's question, which about crowding. And it's obvious to me she hasn't flown on United Airlines recently, or she would stand instantly. My question of you is, do you have any notion of how long it took to build one of these boats?
I don't, because nobody really knows how many people were involved in building one in ancient times. Nowadays, in the Viking Ship Museum, they're in no huge hurry, and some of the people are amateurs. Some of those pictures were from a guy who is an American who is over there, and he was learning how to build Viking ships, and they put him to work, learning how to use one of those single-sided axes, and he was bending one of those strakes and he broke it and learned his lesson, and there's all this stuff. So it's hard to tell. They take months now, and it's a tourist thing also. He says, I work here all day and I have Japanese tourists standing behind me watching me do whatever I do, and so they're not in a huge hurry to build the things. They want to show people
Yeah.
how it was done more than anything else. But one of the books that I read claimed that it took just as long to make the sails as it did to make the boat.
Whoa.
And in fact, it was faster to build the boat than it was to make the sail because of all that weaving and spinning and all that so on that you had to do. But I think you could probably, I don't know. I mean, think about how much work it is to haul one of those logs. You know, if you had the logs already split and ready to go and you said, here, men, here are your axes, go for it. I don't know, you could, and it was summer, you could probably do it over the summer, a couple of months, 3 months, I don't know.
Let me ask the question in a slightly different way. What do you think took longer, building one of those boats or putting in the research you did to put this talk together?
About the same. Well, I have 10 books that I have here. Evelyn gave me 5 and I have 5, or maybe she gave me 6 and I have 4 anyway. And then there's the internet, which is a time sink. You could spend your life on it.
Absolutely. Yeah.
And the internet is actually, I mean, people joke, haha, Wikipedia, blah, blah, blah. But the internet is full of all kinds of things, including scientific papers, like that one about the tar kiln, which is carefully researched, it's archaeologically correct and all that. That little sun gadget, it also was a very erudite paper. It would help a lot if you knew about making maps and plotting and that sort of thing. And I noticed there's also, David McMillan, I think, is asking about sunstones. There's this story that when it's cloudy, if you have the right kind of stone, you can hold it up and it will show you where the sun is. And the theory is that it's refractive, but also, what's the word I'm looking for? What you do to your sunglasses so that they don't reflect up.
Polarizing.
Polarize. So it polarizes and refracts, and it's supposed to make it glow when you move across the horizon and it glows more. So there is a paper where some fellows did that, and they did very careful scientific analysis using every stone that was rumored to work and some that weren't. And their conclusion is that it might work if you were real lucky, but probably not. Especially not if it was cloudy in the northern climes and the sun was, you know, really, really hidden. They were actually studying prismatic effects of something down in the Sahara Desert, and they were using these polarizing stones because of some other culture. And they thought, well, you know, it's said that these Vikings used these sunstones, and let's see if they really did. And I think their conclusion was they don't know of how they did it if they did. So we're not saying they didn't, but it's possible. I don't know, maybe they had minerals we don't know about. No one's ever found one that is claimed to be a Viking sunstone, let's put it that way.
All right. William, you have a question?
Bob, the question of longitude. We know from map makers as early as, say, the 14th, maybe even 13th century, if you were on land and you knew how to read stars and could do the calculations through star tables, you could get the longitude pretty good. That's about as much. But not until John and William Harrison invented the 2 chronometer system in the mid 1700s did we have anything accurate. So when you're going west or east, you know, how do you going north or south, that's fine, but you don't know where the heck you are going east or west.
Well, that's experience, and you go until you run into the land you want to. And, okay, so that is how the Vikings found Newfoundland. Yeah. They missed the bottom of Greenland. And they sailed across, they went north, they thought they'd missed it that way, and they came in to, you know, the coast of Labrador there and sailed down until they found a place that looked semi-habitable, and it turned out it wasn't, because the natives that lived there already said, no way, Jose, and or no way, Hans, or whatever their name was, Rolf.
Yeah.
So,
Wolf.
yeah, so they did have settlements there. They're proven, there's no doubt about that, but they didn't last very long. And it's mostly
3
because they were
years.
driven out by the natives. But
Yeah.
You're right, you don't know how far along you are. And so one of the methods of navigating when you don't know where you are is to aim well up from where you're aiming for. You know, so if you're looking for the tip of Greenland, if you go where you know you're far north of that, you're going to run into the side of Greenland and you can follow it down south. And that's a method that modern navigators have used up until the time everybody had GPS.
Yeah.
I used that myself when I was an aircraft navigator in Antarctica. You know, you didn't know exactly where you were off the coast, and so you'd fly offshore, turn around, come back in, and go along until you found the settlement that you were looking for. So, yeah.
You did refer to sea flotsam and sea animals. And in fact, Christopher Columbus was a lousy navigator, but he could read what was being floated off the Caribbean islands towards him. And he realized that those plants he had never seen before. And therefore, remember, he almost turned around the day before they found America, so to speak. And he kept pushing, give me 24 hours. And because he had realized he had seen coconut palms and other things coming in.
Well, you realize that, you know, this didn't happen in a day. These people were sailing across the North Sea there for hundreds of years. And an experienced sea captain he'd known all the birds, all the animals, he'd know ice blink, he'd know the highest mountain in Iceland, he'd know when he's coming toward Norway, or if he'd missed Norway and he hit the Shetlands, he'd know. It's not like, you know, I'm not going to set out from Bergen in a ship and know what I'm doing, but these guys, I mean, really, there's this, and especially considering that this is a culture that is verbal. You know, they didn't write stuff down. They didn't have written logs, and as far as we know, or anything like that. But, you know, you apprentice as a sailor on the ship, and eventually you become a captain on the ship, and then, you know, you pretty much know what you're doing. And of course, you know, you can't necessarily beat the weather, and there are things that happen, but I think they were pretty good at it. So,
David McMillan, what do you think? What are you thinking?
I was thinking about the 5 ships that got scuttled in the fjord, and I was wondering, did they trade actively in ships? Were ships bartered, or were ships like family heirlooms and owned and carried down?
I don't know, except that I know that chieftains had fleets, and so, you know, this was not a democracy, and it wasn't it wasn't exactly a free sales thing either. I think that individual farms had ships, they had boats. I mean, certainly from earliest times, that's how you got around. They talked about how long it took to get from one place to another, not in going overland, but in going by ship, even if it meant going around the south end of what's now Norway. You know, it'd take 3 days to get from Oslo to Bergen on the ship, and it'd take you a week if you went overland over the hills. So lots of people had boats, but the chieftains and the people in charge had big fleets of boats, and I can't imagine that they didn't have old boats in their fleet. So I don't know how you know, nobody knows, I don't think, how they got the boats or how they selected them or whose they were. And I don't know if they had an active trade, but I wouldn't be surprised. I mean, so your guess is as good as mine on that one.
Any other questions or comments, folks? Charlotte,
She's
unmute, unmute.
Yeah, good. I just did it. Bob, thank you for that wonderful talk. I have a quick question. I think it's quick about the rigging on these boats. You didn't say anything about how they set the mast, and I don't know, and I'm curious if people know that, but that would not be a trivial undertaking. And then the photos that we saw seem to show the boats, the ships, basically sailing downwind.
Oh, well, that's not true. Actually, almost all of those, well, they were not sailing downwind. If you're downwind, the sail is exactly
Right.
perpendicular to the hull. I don't think any of those pictures
Oh,
show
were they
that.
not?
They were all somewhat off the wind. And that's one of the things that for a long time, centuries, people thought that Viking ships couldn't set their sails anything but strictly across. But the archaeology showed that that's not true, and they can actually sail surprisingly close to the wind, considering it's such a sort of clunky thing, just one big square sail.
Right.
But you know, the indication is that they knew for sure that the shape of the sail and the smoothness of the front of it was important.
Right.
The seams, which I think are described as round seams, all of the bulk of that seam is on the back side. So it's sort of pulled to the back, and all the overlap and lumping is all on the back side. So the front is as smooth as an airplane wing.
Wow.
And for the same purpose.
Okay, so they did understand about the pulling.
Yeah, so I think, well, let's see, I could, just a second here, let me find.
30 degrees, 60 degrees off.
Well, you should tell them that.
Let's see here.
Stanley, was that you?
All the sails had bolt ropes along the edges, didn't they, Bob?
That's correct. They had bolt ropes, which essentially go all the way around the edge and make it stiff so that you can tie other ropes to them, and you can turn the sail. So I'm going to, let me just share a picture here for a minute. So look at that ship. That is as close to the wind as you could possibly get with a square sail.
Right.
Stanley said they can get 30 degrees.
What?
The ship's museum said they can sail 60 degrees.
Yeah. So, I mean, in that one, again, the sail is almost in line with the, but you can see all of these lines tied to it to help pull it around and so on. But you've got these great big stays fore and aft and side to side to keep the mast from falling over.
Right.
And yet there are lots of pictures shown where one of these boats is in port and they've taken the mast down. So it wasn't that hard to take it down, but it was a lot of work. I mean, but if you got 60 rowers on there, you got a lot of manpower to do it. So anyway.
Well, thank you.
You're welcome.
Any other thoughts? Yes.
All right.
All right, Evelyn.
Having a small mast like that wasn't terribly difficult. All you need to do is put the foot of the mast on the step and pull some ropes and it would go up. It would probably take about 20 men to pull the largest of those masts vertical.
I should say that my brother Bill was the webmaster for the Patrick O'Brien group. And a lot about sailing. So anyway, but he's right, and that's exactly how it works. There's essentially a socket in the bottom. They built up wood on top of the keel and made a socket. So you put the stem of the bottom of the mast in there and haul it vertical and attach all the ropes front, back, and side, and you've got it there. But the sail itself and the spar that it's on are very heavy. I mean, think about that. It's wool and it's laden with fat and tar and everything else.
It's
It's got to be
wet.
hundreds of pounds. And so there's actually someplace I saw a video of them raising this thing for the first time after they'd built a replica, not the Viking Ship Museum, but someplace else in Norway. Building Viking ships is a big deal in Norway. You can buy kits to build your own Viking ship. And I don't mean little models like, you can buy in the store. I mean big ones. And I don't mean Vikea either. So, anyway. All right.
Hey,
Can I ask a question, Bob?
Yes.
Evelyn?
Sorry, I couldn't get the raise hand button to work. What's with the one in the barn that sailed to Chicago? Is it going to sit there forever, or is someone really trying to
Oh, I know. That's amazing.
renovate it?
Well, it sat outside, I think, in one of the big museums in Chicago. It sat outside for decades and decades. And eventually they moved it into a barn somewhere, and then it moved someplace else. And I think they're raising money to work on restoration and finding a permanent home for it where it can be on display. You can, if you search on Viking ship in Chicago on Google, you can find you can find all kinds of stuff on Google. So
Sure or not.
if you are asked to give a talk about Viking ships, and you start out by Googling building Viking ships, you will be inundated with websites that tell you how to do it. Some of them very detailed, some of them more detailed than is the truth. But you can find a lot, you can find out a huge amount. And if you want to know more about the Viking culture and all that, then I firmly recommend that Ash and Elm book. So, okay.
Thank you, Bob. Terrific.
That's wonderful.
Okay.
Thank you so much.
Good night.
All the work you
Good
did.
Parting words for us, Evelyn?
Hi, David.
See,
Hi, Shelley.
just to
Good night,
thank Bob
everybody.
for doing this for us, and to see it and tell everyone we'll see you back 1 month from now, March the 5th.
Yay.